Talk shoes.
Recorded live.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Travis and Vic's Drunken Horror Adventures. And I'm Travis. I'm not the least bit ashamed to admit that I'm pretty drunk. How you doing, Vic?
What's up, man? What's up? I'm good. How you doing?
Well, just celebrating a successful month at work, celebrating a lot of other things, too. And most importantly, as far as the listeners go, we are celebrating 2 weeks of Starkweather. It kicks off tonight. And, Vic, I have to tell you, I haven't been this excited for a podcast in a long time, man.
Yeah, man, I'm pretty excited myself. I don't know too much about Starkweather other than what you told me over the last month or so. But I'm excited about it. We got a cool little guest come on who, you've been talking to a lot, so hopefully it can be pretty interesting.
Now, as I said, kicking off things here, it's 2 weeks of Starkweather. This week we're going to focus a little bit more on Caril Ann Fugate, which was, depending on who you ask, it was either Starkweather's ex-girlfriend, girlfriend, accomplice, unwilling accomplice, kidnappee. Again, it just really depends on who you ask. And tonight, assuming all goes well, we're going to be speaking to Jeff McArthur, who is the author of Pro Bono, 18-year legal defense of Caril Ann Fugate by his grandfather, John McArthur. So a really kind of historic show for us tonight. And it's even more historic by the fact that tonight, 60 years ago, this very night, sitting in a Wyoming jail cell was Caril Ann Fugate in one cell, or in a holding area, and Charles Starkweather in the other one. So pretty amazing timing on our part, I have to say.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I don't know if you planned it like that, but I guess it kind of worked out.
Well, I remember once upon a time, maybe whenever we were talking about Red Christmas, maybe before that, we had discussed what we were going to talk about in January as far as serial killers go. So we looked up, serial killings, things like that kind of had a January theme to it. And for me, Starkweather came up. And I didn't plan the date the way it worked out, but it just seemed to coincide perfectly. Again, 60 years ago, he was arrested yesterday, 60 years ago, to my knowledge, and Caril Ann Fugate, of course, although she didn't know she was arrested. That's something we'll get into with Jeff McArthur. But, yeah, Starkweather, he was arrested. He was sitting in a jail cell in Wyoming. He was on the run. Lincoln, Nebraska is where his crimes took place, well, except for the one in Wyoming where he actually got busted. But, yeah, he had fled the state to get away and still got busted. And that's kind of what brings us to tonight, 60 years later. I would say it's hard to believe it's been 60 years, but we weren't around in 1958. You know what I'm saying? But Starkweather is a part of the public consciousness. He is one of those things, like a Manson. He's always been there for us, and he's been there before Manson did his thing. So before there was Manson, there was Charlie Starkweather. And this guy, as far as spree killing, he may have been the guy that started it all.
That's awesome, man. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about him and hearing more. And these next 2 weeks should be really, really awesome.
Yeah. See, I want to sit here and say Starkweather was an interesting guy. I'm not totally sure that's accurate, though, because he wasn't that interesting. The things he did were pretty crazy and interesting in their own way. The case itself was interesting. I don't know that he was interesting. I got to get into this with Jeff. I'm always curious about these serial killers' IQs, and I know maybe Charlie doesn't meet the typical serial killer information, but because, again, spree killer, a little bit different than the serial killer. But, I'm just curious how his matches up to the others. I know he grew up struggling in school. He struggled at work. And, I would guess, and again, I'm not totally sure, I would guess that his IQ was not on the higher side of things as far as these types of killers go. And hopefully, either at the end of this podcast or the start of it, whenever this plays on Spreaker, we will have a clip from Starkweather and, his last interview, and you can hear exactly what I'm talking about, because I don't think he was a smart guy, to be honest with you. I just don't, Okay, so what I'm looking at right now is he had an IQ of 110. All right, so 110 is certainly not on the high end of things compared to some of these other guys like Bundy or even a Manson, or we could go on and on. But yeah, Starkweather, not one of the smartest from what I can tell. And when you hear him talk, you can kind of pick up on it. He had a kind of a speech impediment, and granted, if somebody has a speech impediment, that doesn't automatically point to their IQ. But, I mean, you don't get the impression of intelligence when you hear Starkweather talk. In fact, there were a lot of moments during this whole killing spree that really kind of sealed his own fate. I mean, the guy had a chance, and we'll get into this with Jeff, to get off. He could have tried to, plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but him and his family felt like it was kind of better death than dishonor, and it was worse to say that he was crazy than to cop to the murders. So that's just kind of how it goes. So it is 9:05 Eastern Time now while we're doing this recording. So Jeff is actually calling in now. What timing? He is the man as far as timing goes. But, when you're in his profession, that's just kind of how it goes. So Jeff will be on in 3, 2, 1. There he is. What's going on, everybody? Jeff McArthur on the line, the author of Pro Bono. How you doing, sir?
Good. How you doing?
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. This is probably the most excited I've been for a podcast in a long time. I had kind of gone through the media history of the things you had done and kind of listened to your previous interviews and things like that. And it's one of these books and these stories that is just, I mean, let's be honest. This story of Charles Starkweather and Caril Ann Fugate is infused with the American culture, but it's not one of those stories that's told correctly, and that's kind of what your book tries to do, correct?
Exactly. And that's, to me, that's always been the most important thing. Whatever anybody ends up in the end feeling about Caril Fugate, ultimately, to me, what's been important is at least understand what the truth was and what really happened, and, and that's, or at least what the facts are as we know them. So yeah, I'm glad that you're interested in, learning about that and all that sort of thing, because it's, like you say, it's always been told in this kind of messed up way as like the second Bonnie and Clyde and all that, and it's like, well, no, the truth is actually more interesting, quite frankly. So.
Yeah, and that's what I was telling Vic before you came on. I was telling him how, okay, Charles Starkweather was not that interesting of a guy, but the case itself is what was interesting, especially the Caril Fugate angle of it all. And what's really important to me is to get the truth out there, because, I mean, you and I may not be able to tell the whole truth because we weren't there, but we can try to tell the story correctly, because I'll make the best comparison before I let you get into things. Once upon a time, we did a podcast on Elizabeth Bathory, and everybody thinks of Elizabeth Bathory as the the countess that bathed in the blood of 100 virgins, but that's just not true.
Oh.
I hate to break everybody's hearts, but that's just that's legend. And even though this case literally is 60 years old today, or over the last couple days, what is probably not true. So, Jeff, I'm going to kind of let you set it up for me.
All right. Well, and first of all, I'm really glad you said that about based on what we know of it, because that's one of the things I really tried to go out of my way to make sure to do in the book and all that sort of thing, was rather than say, well, my point of view as fact, but rather say, well, here are the facts, and this is my point of view on it. So, what we know, actually, basically what happened in the 1950s, or, like you say, 60 years ago today, which my dad, it just all of a sudden occurred to him. I was with him. We were driving around, and all of a sudden he went, that's going to be 60 years ago this month. Anyway, 1958, we're essentially, the 50s are going on as we've always sort of read them, and heard about them being kind of this era of innocence, and a lot of people sort of leaving, especially in the Midwest, leaving the doors unlocked and all that sort of thing. And all of a sudden there's this murder spree where 11 people are killed, and in today's world that's considered, sort of minor, but in those days that's, unheard of. And actually it had been 10 people at one particular over the course of a couple of days, or over the course of over a week or so. But and then there had been another before. And in the end, there were these two teenagers who were, picked up, and in the papers it was reported as two of these teenagers were captured and then brought back to Nebraska, and it was said that it was this boy, this 19-year-old or young man named Charles Starkweather, and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Caril Fugate, who had been out on this murder spree, and there had been all these bodies in their wake, so it was believed that they had murdered all of them. And some of the victims were her family members, her mother, her stepfather, and her baby half sister. And so my grandfather was assigned to assigned to the case, or basically given the case for Caril Fugate, because of the fact that she couldn't afford an attorney. Her parents were gone, although she had a father who was still alive, but he was arrested for drunk and disorderly at a bar the same day that she was, she was picked up in Wyoming. So she had no one to look out for her, and so he, was willing to take the case, and basically, appointed. There's the word I'm looking for. He was appointed by the court, and he went into the case just having no real opinion on it, whether she was guilty or not. He just believed everybody has the right to an attorney. He always believed in defending the Constitution in that way. And so he kind of was like, well, we'll get in there and see what kind of best plea deal we can get or something like that. But then as he sat down with her, he found the story was much more involved than was being reported. That first of all, she had broken up with him a couple days before the whole thing started, before the whole murder spree started, and that she had left all these clues for the police that the police simply had not followed up on. And she hadn't been captured in Wyoming. She actually ran to the police. She was actually the reason why the police were able to catch him. That she had jumped into the policeman's car who had not seen Charlie. He was literally about to kill his 12th victim, and she pointed out to him what was happening, and he saw it, and then the police officer was then able to call ahead and have somebody else, chase after him and everything. But anyway, and that nobody had actually told her that she was up for, or that she was going to be charged with accessory to murder. And so, he was the one who had to sort of spring that on her. And nobody even told her that her own parents had been killed, or that her mother and stepfather had been killed. Apparently, this entire time, she was at school, first of all, when they were killed, and then she came home to find Charlie only find Charlie there. And now is where we're kind of breaking into speculation. We do know that she was at school, that she wasn't at the time they were murdered. But when she got home, that's when it kind of becomes the he said, she said type of situation. But both of them declared that she got home, that Charlie had already taken the bodies out into a shed in the backyard and had left them there. And then when she came home, she had no idea that he had killed them. And he basically told her, do everything I tell you or I'm going to have your family killed. And so she had kind of gone along with him during the entire murder spree when he just went around kind of randomly killing people in Nebraska. And then, and then at the end she finds out, actually at first she was asking, so what happened to my family? When they were, when she was in Wyoming with the police, she was going, what happened? And nobody would tell her until she was like halfway back to Nebraska. Someone finally said, well, don't you know? And they told her that, that they had been killed. And she learned that she had been doing all this stuff for this guy just to keep them alive, and they had been dead the entire time. So he kind of learns, or my grandfather learns about all of that, and so that was both of their stories. I mean, both of their stories matched. Charlie's and Caril's stories both matched, that she had been that he had kidnapped her, taken her along, unwillingly, all that sort of thing, until the police had this narrative that she had been involved, and they had charged her with accessory to murder before they even had all the facts, before they had even captured Charlie. They had already charged her with accessory to murder. And now there were all these questions as to, well, how come you didn't catch him? Because she had left behind all of these clues. So they wanted to, they were desperate to kind of find some way to show that she was guilty. So they went to Charlie and said, oh, by the way, Caril's saying that you're crazy. And he very much did not want to be referred to as being crazy. So he said, okay, well, let me, in fact, he actually could have given the insanity plea. He was very clearly nuts. But he refused to do that, and so they knew that would be the way to get him. And he, sure enough, as soon as they said, oh, she's saying that you're crazy, he changed his story completely and started saying, well, let me tell you what really happened. And from that moment forward, he told a different story every time, and every single story was, well, she was guilty in this way. Well, then she did this. Oh, and she also murdered this person. And